And our presenter today is Lynn Goodsell. She's the Reference Branch Chief for Electronic Records Division of the National Archives, and she has been with the division since 2004. She has an MA in History with an emphasis on archival management from the University of California, Riverside. Thank you very much, Lynn, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to the North Carolina Library Association for the opportunity to participate in the Help, I'm an Accidental Government Information Librarian webinars. And I have to say, I really love the title of your webinars. Some fine print before I begin. I should note that any views or opinions expressed in this presentation are mine and don't necessarily reflect the National Archives' positions or policies. I'll also probably fall into the habit of calling the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration by its acronym, NARA. And as Linda mentioned, I will try to address questions at the end. I've hopefully left a good amount of time to do that. So usually when you think about the National Archives and government records, you probably think of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, Matthew Brady Civil War photographs, genealogical research using census records, the presidential libraries, or maybe even Project Blue Book reports. Or maybe you think of scenes from the movie National Treasure. Most folks think of the National Archives in terms of paper records, photographs, maps, maybe motion pictures, but few think of electronic records or data. For well over a century, the U.S. federal government has produced an ever-increasing volume and variety of electronic records in the course of doing business. And many of these electronic records have permanent value beyond their initial use and creation. So along with the Constitution and Civil War photographs, the National Archives accessions, preserves, and provides access to valuable U.S. federal government electronic records. In this presentation, I'm going to give an overview on the types of electronic records available at the National Archives and how to access them. I'm going to be focusing mostly on data files, especially those of high demand and of our most interest to historians and social scientists. Allow me to start by providing a brief introduction to the National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA. In a nutshell, the National Archives is the nation's record keeper. We're responsible for preserving and providing access to permanently valuable federal records, along with helping the federal government manage the records. Only about 1 to 3% of the records created by the federal government are identified as having permanent value. Records that document important government activities, have long-term research worth, or provide significant information of value to citizens are considered having permanent value. These records then come to the National Archives once the agency no longer needs them. All other records are considered temporary and are destroyed after a set period of time. Even with only us keeping 1 to 3% of the records, we have a lot. Currently, NARA holds approximately 10 billion pages of paper records and a large volume of the photographs, maps, engineer drawings, motion pictures, and electronic records, as listed here on the slide. NARA has about 40 facilities nationwide, including 2 headquarters buildings in the D.C. metro area, a dozen field archives from Atlanta to Seattle, presidential libraries for Presidents Hoover through George W. Bush. A fair amount of NARA's holdings across all media types and facilities are described in the National Archives catalog, and I'll be showing that shortly. The National Archives website, which is listed there at the top, provides additional information about our holdings and how to access them. Since 1968, the National Archives has received and preserved electronic or machine-readable records from across the government, including Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House. Several units at the National Archives handle specific types of electronic records. For example, the presidential libraries are responsible for presidential emails. The Still Pictures Unit manages digital photographs, and the Legislative Unit takes care of electronic records created by Congress. My office, the Electronic Records Division, manages the variety of electronic records created by all the other federal agencies, from the Agricultural Department to Veterans Affairs. The Electronic Records Division has custody of hundreds of millions of files from agencies across the government. And there's a couple ways to broadly characterize our electronic records holdings, and one is by format and file type. To date, much of our holdings consist of data created for statistical and quantitative analysis. This includes data from censuses, surveys, tracking databases, filings, and other methods of collection. And these data files are of particular interest to academics in the social science fields who do a lot of statistical or quantitative analysis. A small number of these data files also have what we call record-level data. These data records contain a personal name or document a specific transaction. So the record, the individual data record, has value independent from the other records in the file. We may have a World War II enlistment database, and you could use that for quantitative analysis, but there is also the record of somebody's individual grandfather, and they would want that to document his service in the war. So a user may be interested in just the specific record and not want all the rest. We also have a rapidly growing number of non-fielded or unstructured records. These might include narrative reports in text format, PDF, or Microsoft Word. We also have websites, email, and geospatial records. Format plays a role in how we provide access to the records. One of the unique aspects of NARA's Electronic Records Program is our mission is to preserve and provide access to the records for the length of the Republic. So if you can think back to how many of you can access your WordPerfect files from the 1980s, we need to be able to provide access to the electronic records created today for hopefully hundreds and hundreds of years. In order to do this, NARA preserves electronic records in a software-independent format or formats with long-term sustainability. We don't preserve the software or the application that an agency used to create the data. Consequently, most of our files consist of raw data, which then requires layouts and code lists to interpret. And usually, the files have not had the standard file extensions of .csv or .txt. Therefore, researchers often have to manually import the data into the appropriate software, and occasionally some additional processing is required in order to use the data with today's programs. We don't have the resources, unfortunately, to do extensive processing or converting of files to formats specific to today's programs. Our electronic records have associated technical documentation. The technical documentation includes records layouts, field descriptions, code meanings, and user notes. The record layout identifies the fields, how many characters are in the field, and the format of the data in the field. In this example, the record layout would indicate that the first field consists of characters 1 and 2 and contains the airline carrier code, in this case AA. And that columns 13 through 18 contain the arrival date in a year, month, day format. The code list would then give you the meanings for the coded data, and the airline carrier code list would show that it's AA means American Airlines. So from this record, we know an American Airlines flight arrived on January 1st, 1997. Some of our technical documentation may include samples of the survey forms, weighting and sample selection, background on the creation of the records, manuals for using the systems that created the records, instructions for collecting and coding the data, and occasionally final reports. For our non-data files, the documentation may include a file list or index along with background information on those records. I've gone into this detail about the formats because second to being asked where to find the data, we're most frequently asked how to use or open the data once a user has them. So this may come up when you are directing researchers to our resources. Another way to characterize our holdings is by subject, and here are some examples. Our holdings reflect the diverse activities of the federal government, including the data agencies collect as part of their mission and the records agencies create in carrying out their mission. For example, we have the Department of Agriculture issuing certificates to protect intellectual property rights relating to the breeding of new plant species. We have the Census Bureau counting the population every 10 years as required by the Constitution. There are records documenting government spending. The Department of Defense captured information on air combat missions flown during the Vietnam War for reporting and evaluation purposes. There's data collected as part of the government evaluation on the enforcement of the Civil Rights Act or airline deregulation, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have close to 970 series or sets of records from over 160 government organizations and 11 collections of donated materials, and this volume grows daily. A few of the sets of the records contain information dating prior to 1940, but most contain information from the last half of the 20th century to the present, and we do have one or two series with projection data that goes as far into the future as 2050. And all of our records are described in the National Archives catalog, which I'll show a little later. Before going further, I should quickly note how records are organized here at the National Archives. At the highest level, records are organized by the creating organization. The record group contains records of large government organizations, both current and defunct government bureaus and independent agencies. Each record group is assigned a number. For example, records of the Bureau of Census are in record group 29. Records of the Office of the Secretary of the Army are in record group 335. And records of the Civilian Conservation Corps from World War II or from the 1940s are in record group 35. At the next level, records are organized into series, and a series is a set of records or files grouped together because they result from the same activity or have some relationship arising out of their creation, receipt, or use. A series can be further organized by file units, which is a subgrouping of the records. Then there's individual items, such as the specific document or photograph. When looking for records at the National Archives, we often suggest researchers try to identify the agency that may have created or kept the records, and thus what record group, and drill down from there. With all of this background information, how can you access the electronic records in our holdings? We provide access two ways. The first is via the Access to Archival Databases, or AAD, resource. With AAD, you can search and retrieve individual interpreted data records that have record-level interest. AAD currently contains about 120 million individual records from a small selection of structured electronic records that identify specific persons, events, or activities. Some of the records include Korean War and Vietnam War casualty records, records about military contracts, and records about security transactions. Many of the records on AAD are also of interest for genealogical research, such as a selection of 19th century passenger list records and nearly 9 million World War II Army enlistment records. So what's shown here is the AAD main page, and I've drawn arrows to a couple of things to point out. The first in the upper right is the Getting Started Guide, which provides some guidelines on how to use AAD. To begin your search, you first need to determine what set of records or series you wish to search, and there's a couple ways to go about this. In the lower right, you could click on the Browse by Subjects for a list of the subject topics represented in the records, which would then link you to the series related to that topic. Above that, you could click on the Show All series for a list of all the series available in AAD in chronological order by the dates found in the records. Or over in the left, under the green Search AAD, you could do a free text search across all the records on AAD. This searches the records, not the titles or sets of records. For the first example, I'm going to show how to search our most popular non-statistical file on AAD, and that is the electronic telegrams from the Department of State dating from the 1970s. The electronic telegrams are communications between the Department of State and Foreign Service posts abroad. In some respects, you can think of these as precursors to email. These messages contain information about foreign policy along with international economic, social, and military concerns. For those familiar with the foreign relations of the United States publications, the telegrams are some of the source material for them. I usually narrow down my search by clicking from one of the categories here on the AAD main page, and in this case, the electronic telegrams are listed under the category Diplomatic Records. When we click on that link, we see a list of the series and files in AAD related to diplomatic records, and there's only the one series, the Central Foreign Policy Files. What we make available on AAD are the 2 million electronic telegrams, withdrawal cards, and index entries from the Central Foreign Policy Files from 1973 through 1977. We're in the process of making the 1978 telegrams available on AAD, hopefully in the next coming couple of weeks. The series also includes a large portion of paper records, which are referenced in the PREAL index entries. These paper records can be viewed in person at the National Archives at College Park, or you can request them through that unit. Now, if we wanted to go straight to the search page for one of the files, we could click on the search icon next to the file name. But instead, I'm going to walk you through the series description page, and we do that by clicking on the search icon next to the series description, series title, which is there in the bold blue. The series description provides information about the records and is useful when citing the records. It also lists all the available file units. We only make the unrestricted electronic telegrams and index entries available on AAD. For those records that have restrictions, there are withdrawal cards containing some information about the record withheld. The withdrawal cards are also searchable, so researchers interested in a telegram or document referenced by a withdrawal card can submit a Freedom of Information Act request for a review and possible release of the record. For our first example here, we're going to look for records relating to the press coverage of Secretary of State Kissinger's visit to Egypt in December 1973 as part of the Middle East peace negotiations. So we'll narrow down our search by clicking on the search icon for the 1973 electronic telegrams file. This brings us to the fielded search page. The top portion, which is there at the top, lists the files and series you're searching. Now there's additional information about the records available through AAD, and that's by hovering over the File Unit Information drop-down box there on the top, and I've circled it. Here you can select to view the layout of the records, which is shown in the box in the lower left. The layout includes the code lists and notes on the fields. You can also view any scanned technical documentation, the examples there on the lower right, which is the documentation for the records. The documentation may include some of the instructions for compiling the records, the data dictionary, reports, forms, and other materials to aid in understanding the records. You can also click to view the FAQs, and I've drawn an arrow to that. For these records in particular, it's very important for researchers to view the FAQs because of the complex relationship between the electronic records and the paper records. On the bottom half of the fielded search screen is the search box where you enter your criteria. You could do a free text search under the green box, search this file. This free text search box appears at other pages, such as the series description page or on the category page, allowing you to do that search on various levels. You can also search by the specific fields in the records. In the field title column on the left, you could click on the field titles for details about each field. We're able to make these narrative electronic records available via AAD because the message attributes for the telegrams, such as date, to, from, subject, are in a structured format and function like fields in a database. Each search page includes some default fields for searching, but you can use the Show More Fields option to the right to select the fields in the records you want to search. So you can select any of the fields, up to 10 fields, in any of the databases on AAD to do custom searching. Here I've entered in some of the search criteria. For our search, I changed the draft date search operator to between and entered the date ranges of December 13th through the 14th, the time period of Kissinger's visit. Since we're interested in press coverage of the visit in Egypt, we can narrow our search to just those telegrams coming from Cairo. So I entered Cairo in the From field, and I also added Press in the Message Text field to further narrow the search. The search returned 4 records. The Display Partial Records page gives an idea of the information in the records to help you determine which records you would like to view in full. To then view the full record, you can click on the icon in the View Record column. This telegram, which is a little difficult to read, is comparing the press coverage of the Secretary's last visit to Egypt to his current one. If we were able to scroll down to the next page, that lists the message attributes or the metadata for this telegram, and that is some of the material that is searchable for these cables. So that is the Central Foreign Policy File Electronic Cables on AAD. Now, returning back to the AAD main page, you can run searches on the records to generate some basic figures. And this is useful for researchers who are looking for some statistics or numbers but don't need to do extensive analysis or don't have much experience working with data. Beginning in the early 1980s, the military began periodically transferring records about military personnel who died in the Korean War and Vietnam War in an electronic database format. The most recent transfer also contained casualty records since the Vietnam War up through 2006, including casualties of the Gulf War, the War on Terrorism, other military operations, and peacetime. We often get requests from researchers looking for casualty records, such as the number of casualties during a certain period of time or casualties from a particular state or city. And we can direct researchers to AAD where they can run searches to obtain the numbers they seek. Here we can click on the category Casualties for a list of the series on AAD containing casualty records. Looking through this list, you can see that prisoners of war are also considered casualties. We have a set of World War II prisoner of war records, which aren't shown here, but are available through the World War II link. Scrolling through the list, about halfway through, is the Department of Defense's Defense Casualty Analysis System, or DCAS. We received these records in 2009, and they contain the most up-to-date casualty records. For this example, we're looking for monthly casualty records relating to the Vietnam War. So we'll select the Defense Casualty Analysis System for the time period of 1950 through 2005. This is taking us straight to the search page, and we can do a search for all the records within a month period to get the information we need. In this example, I did a search for the number of for the month of May in 1971 in the incident or death date field. I also selected the code for the Vietnam conflict as the war or conflict field. In the corner is the example of the window that appears when you click to select on from the code list. And you can see the code list includes the coded values along with the meanings for those coded values. The search returns 2002 records. So for May 1971, there were 202 fatal casualties during the Vietnam War. You then could go back and repeat the search for other months. But at this point, one of the features to point out is you can download the results, up to 1,000 records per query in a comma-separated format, separated value or CSV format, and view them with whatever program you have. You can download just the raw data or the records with the meanings. The download includes the full record, not just the fields we see here on the partial records page. And the download link is up there at the top. Let's take a look at one of the full records by clicking on the record for Major William Adams, who was a Medal of Honor recipient. This page, which is a little tiny, displays the full data record. It's a big record. AAD here has done the work of applying the layout and code list to the raw data. The column on the left lists the field names. The actual raw data, as recorded by the agency and preserved by the National Archives, is in the value column in the middle. The meaning column on the right provides the meaning for coded data or renders dates in a more traditional date format. In some cases, the agency may have not provided some code meanings, and by displaying both the raw data and meanings when known, gives users an opportunity to identify fields that have unknown meanings and draw their own conclusions. Or if they think the meaning may be incorrect, they can see the raw data, look at the code lists, and draw their own conclusions. From this casualty record, we learn that Major Adams was killed in action on May 25, 1971, just shy of his 32nd birthday. His Medal of Honor citation explains he was serving as a helicopter pilot and was killed during a rescue mission. For our last example of AAD, we're going to look at the ever-popular government spending records. We have over 54 million records on AAD relating to government expenditures, contracts, grants, and assistance, both civilian and military. The largest series is the records about grants, insurance, loans, subsidies, and other economic assistance awarded by federal agencies, also known as Federal Assistance Award Data System, or more simply known as FADS. The Census Bureau originally compiled these records for fiscal years 1982 through 2010. Data for fiscal year 2011 and forward are available on usaspending.gov. So here I've clicked on the search icon for FADS at the series level, bringing us to the series description page. FADS consists of 116 files, 4 quarterly files per fiscal year. A researcher looking for spending trends over a period of time may not want to run a search in each file. So on the series description page, you can conduct a search across all the files in the series. For this example, let's look for records of grants awarded by the National Archives, National Historical Publications, and Records Commission. So for starters, I just plugged in our acronym NARA in the free text search box. In the lower box, we see that search returned 1,655 records across 65 different files. Some researchers would be willing to go in and view the results for each file to download the results or do what they needed to do. However, those wanting to conduct more sophisticated analysis across all the files would probably rather work with the files on their own software program where they could merge files and do more elaborate analysis. Up until recently, the only option for those researchers who wanted the full files was to order reproductions. But now we've begun to make our electronic records holdings available for download via NARA's catalog. The catalog includes descriptions of most of NARA's holdings across the various units, facilities, and media types. New descriptions are routinely added. The catalog also provides access to some of NARA's digitized and digital holdings. The digital holdings, or objects, are attached to the respective descriptions, but only at the file unit and item level. And that's important to keep in mind. Think back to the chart showing NARA's how we organize our records. Please note that in the scope of all of NARA's holdings, relatively few are available online. For those descriptions of records that aren't online, researchers will need to contact the appropriate NARA unit for information on how to access those records. By attaching our digital files to the descriptions, we can provide access to the full file and any associated documentation. This also means we make available all the types of records in our holdings. We started this process, as in making them available online, about 4 years ago, starting with the series with most demand. Thus far, we have less than 1% of our series available for download, but again, since we started with the most demand, odds are pretty good a lot of what researchers are seeking are available online. To just clarify, the catalog is a different type of access than AAD. AAD, you can search for individual interpreted data records from a very limited set of the files. But through the catalog, researchers can obtain the full file to do the analysis on their computer. While AAD interprets the raw data, what we provide through the catalog is the raw data, so researchers are going to have to interpret the data using the layouts and code lists as discussed at the beginning. Eventually, most of the files available on AAD will also be available for download through the catalog. Again, those files with the most demand, including those already on AAD, are available on the catalog. Here is the home page for our new version of the catalog. The new version went live a couple of months ago, and NARA is continuing to add additional features and work out the usual glitches that come up when moving to a new system. Returning to our quest to access the Federal Assistance Awards Data System files, I searched the catalog as shown here. The search returned 371 results. This search page, the one you automatically land to, includes both descriptions of records only, descriptions with online holdings, and pages from NARA's website. Since we're interested in the descriptions with electronic records attached or online holdings, we can click the filter Online at the top, so only descriptions with digital objects attached are listed. Having done that, we now see the objects with just online holdings, and at the top of the results we see Federal Assistance Award Data System, with the paper icon on the left which also tells us it's online. So we can click on the result to access the file unit description. And here's a description of the records. On the left we see the record hierarchy, which tells us we're looking at a file unit description. The bottom of the page, which really isn't shown here, provides descriptive information about the file unit. Each description has a unique identifier, the National Archives identifier. When sending in a reference request about records described in the catalog, it is very, very, very helpful to include the National Archives identifier. You can also use that number to search the catalog to get to a specific description. But our main focus here are the records that are available for download listed at the beginning of the description. For our series containing data files, we identify what files contain technical documentation and what files contain the electronic records or data. We also try to distinguish between the files that are viewable in a browser, such as a PDF, versus those that really should be downloaded only, such as a raw data file, or files without a file extension that need to be opened in specific types of software. As you can see, each file listed includes a link to access the file name, an indication of the format and the byte size. For data files, you'll find there will be at least a minimum of a technical specification summary that contains the technical metadata, the technical documentation associated with the file, and the data itself. We'll click on the technical specification summary to see what it contains. The technical specification summary lists all the unique files in that series or file unit available for download through the catalog. It also provides some of the technical metadata, such as the narrative title of file title, the file name, format, byte size, etc. We also include the unique identifiers for the file in the description. At the top, we've included, again, the record hierarchy to provide context, and so users have the needed information for properly citing the source. If we had clicked on the link to access the documentation for FADS FY 1982, we would get the PDF containing the scanned documentation. Sometimes the technical documentation is the same for multiple files and thus shows up with each file unit description. In those cases, you only need to get one copy. The technical specification summary can help clarify if there's just one documentation file for multiple files or if there are multiple documentation files. Returning back to the series description, depending on your browser, when you click to download the data file, you might get a window to prompt you to save the file. In this case, we've compressed the data file using WinZip for a quicker download, so the file has a .zip extension. If there isn't a file extension, we recommend saving the files as all files. Once the file is downloaded, researchers can use the technical metadata described in the technical specification summary to determine the format and thus what appropriate software to use. Researchers then can open or import the data into the program using the technical documentation to interpret the raw data. Given the housing and mortgage crisis of several years ago, it probably comes as no surprise that we regularly get requests for mortgage data. In fact, I think that may have prompted the invitation to speak today. Under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act of 1975, the Federal Reserve System collects home loan data submitted by financial institutions. We've received Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data from 1981 to 2011. So I searched the catalog for descriptions of our holdings relating to home mortgage disclosure data. The first few results showing up here look promising, especially the first one. Before we click on that result, though, I should explain the Not Available Online icon to the left of the search result. This icon can be a little misleading. It appears with all series descriptions, even if the associated file unit description includes online holdings. So the bottom line is, even when you see that icon, always explore a little further to determine if the records are online or not. We could, in this case, click on the online link like we did last time, or view all the file units within the series. So here, I've clicked on the series title, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act Data Files. This brings us to the series description page. Again, the record hierarchy is displayed on the left. The information in the description includes the title, creator, and record group. The details section describes the date span of the records, why the agency created the records and how they used them, and any use or access restrictions. The scope and content section, further down and not shown, outlines what information is in the records. The variant control number section includes the various identifiers for the records. The archived copy section gives the volume of the records, such as the number of files or inches of paper, and the contact information for the reference unit that provides reference services for the records. Users should direct any questions about the records in that description to the NARA unit listed there. So at this point, we still don't know if the records are available online. So the next step is to click on the link to view the associated file unit descriptions, which I've boxed in there in red. You also could click on the search within this series icon to run a search within that set of file units. It's at the file unit description level where we are making records available for download. When I click on that link, I get a list of all the file units that belong to that series. And here we are seeing the little paper icon which indicates online holdings. Again, we could click on the online refinement to see what, if any, of the file units have digital objects. So we'll click on the first one for the loan application register data in 1981. And here is the file unit. As you can see from this list, some of our holdings, there may be quite a bit of technical documentation. And in some of ours, we have multiple electronic records attached to a single file unit. In the few minutes I have left, I'd like to highlight a couple more series from our holdings. One of these is the American Soldier and World War II surveys. During World War II, the Department of Defense conducted numerous surveys to collect information on soldiers' attitudes towards various aspects of military life. The surveys touch upon all sorts of topics from race relations, medical care, combat conditions, post-war plans, and military rank. There are a total of 84 surveys comprised of 138 data files. NARA also has additional paper or textual records relating to this series. As I mentioned earlier, we are beginning to receive a growing number of non-data electronic records. We just made available a set of PDFs containing speeches and presentations from the directors of the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service from 1960 through to 2004, and here's one of the examples. You'll notice this display is a little different from the ones we just looked at. Since the electronic file itself is a PDF, it's displayed using the embedded viewer, so you can view the document without having to download it first, although you still have that option. In closing, I realize this has been a lot of information, both on what we have and how to access it. And I've really only scratched the surface in terms of the variety of our holdings. So I encourage you to visit our website listed there at the top. Our website has reference reports that highlight some of our holdings relating to specific topics such as civil rights, the Internal Revenue Service, Vietnam War military activities, and the decennial census. The second link is to the Access to Archival Databases resource, or AAD, and that's the first resource I demonstrated, where you can search and retrieve individual interpreted data records. The National Archives, the resource I just showed you, has descriptions of essentially all of our holdings and links to download or view full files for a growing number of our series, both data and non-data files. I've also included a link to the frequently asked questions on accessing electronic records via the catalog. We're in the process of updating the page in light of the new version of the catalog. Some of the questions addressed include what software to use, what is technical documentation, and how to download the files. I also encourage you to search the catalog to see what other types of records we have. If you find descriptions for records not available online, please contact us on how to order copies, or if you have any questions about the records. The last link there provides some information about ordering records from our unit. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share what we have here at the National Archives in terms of electronic records and data. I'm hoping I've left enough time to try to answer any questions folks may have. So there's a question about the copyright situation with documents accessed directly via the NARA website. Do they retain their public domain status? Are there any suggested citation models? Government records do not have copyright, so they're all in the public domain, and right now, we're making sure the records we make available for download or access don't have copyright issues. There is a NARA reference paper in our publication sections that gives some guidance on how to cite our records. And if you want to contact me, I can direct you to that resource. A second question has come in about all the microfilm you have issued over the years. Will these items be digitized? Is there any systematic project on this? Our office is focused on just born digital records, so I can't speak in great detail. But NARA has embarked on several digitization partnerships, especially with a lot of the major genealogical groups and businesses out there who are working with NARA to digitize a lot of our microfilm And as part of the partnerships, I believe there are plans for NARA to eventually get those digitized images and thus make available through the catalog. If you have questions later that come to mind, the contact information is there. Where to contact our reference unit at cer@nara.gov. Our telephone number is 301-837-0470. And we will be more than happy to try to help you or direct you to who may have the records if we don't have them. Yes, the $64 million question. Are there problems in getting diplomatic telegrams released because of classification or national security problems? So when the State Department transfers the telegrams to us, yes, there are some telegrams that they've been reviewed and have determined need to remain classified. Those records that are withheld for classification reasons, there are the withdrawal cards there for them. So if researchers search the withdrawal cards and find a withdrawal card they're interested in, they can file a Freedom of Information Act, and that will start a process where there will be a review of the records that may result in parts or the record in full being declassified. That can be a lengthy process. And I certainly can give more details about accessing those records if you want to contact me separately. Who to email regarding accessing the State Department cables or those electronic telegrams? You can email cer@nara.gov. If you recall, if you go into AAD and go to those records and click on the FAQs, there's also information there on who to contact regarding the electronic records, regarding the paper records, and regarding those records still at the State Department.
Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you very much, Lynn, for a wonderful webinar.
You're more than welcome. I know it was a lot. I had a hard time picking what records to highlight.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't too much. It's just a matter of going through it all and putting it in practice now. But thank you very much.